Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, June 18th, 2025. Today, we are going to talk about garlic curing and storage, the overlooked relationship between manufacturing and farmland, and flower power, but the easy way. So let's do it. All right, lovely Wednesday to you all. I will start having more interviews on Wednesday as promised, but this week I couldn't get it worked out in time. In fact, summers are a bit tough with interviews, only because, well, farm people are farming, including your host. But I do have another one coming up for the next week that I'm pretty excited about. So otherwise, I hope everyone has had a manageable week so far. We have definitely entered the grind period of the season for most of us here in the U.S. For us right now, it's a lot of harvest, plant, start seeds, harvest, plant, start seeds, do it all over again and hold on to your hats, straw ones, because, summer. Okay, so on Monday, we talked about when to harvest garlic. So today, let's talk a bit about curing and storing because, well, it's not the best idea to do all that work to grow the garlic and then lose it to rot in storage. I tried that one year, don't recommend it. The good news is there are several ways to cure and store garlic, and although there are optimal conditions, technically, the range or potential conditions is quite broad. We have successfully cured and stored garlic in a garage with fans, in a barn cut and put on racks, in a barn with no fans, or cut and put on racks with minimal fans. And currently we store them in what seems to be maybe an old smokehouse or something, but it's relatively open space that we can hang them from the ceiling through woven wire fencing. All that to say, there are a lot of different ways to do it. But first, let's back up. I should have said this on Monday, but be gentle with garlic when you harvest it. If the garlic is handled too roughly when it is still technically green, or what we generally call fresh, then it will bruise, thus decreasing its longevity in storage, or those little cloves that got bruised will basically turn brown and rot. Sometimes you see people recommend curing garlic in the field. I'm not one of those people. You have a little leeway, obviously, like you don't have to harvest it and then immediately get it somewhere shady, but you do not want to leave your garlic out in the field in general, in the sun, because sun scald can be a big issue with garlic and can not only damage the garlic cloves themselves, but decrease its storage life. So for us, after the harvest is pretty much done for the day, we move that garlic to a well-ventilated area that can be anywhere from 65 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 to 30 degrees Celsius. The ventilation is key. An open barn can work, but a closed building will require fans. Some people say to cure the bulbs with the roots pointed up, and I think that's fine and for a fast cure, but that does require some amount of infrastructure to be able to place the bulbs sort of pointed straight up and down. For us, like I said, we shove them into woven wire fencing that hangs from a barn ceiling. The effect is there is a good space between the bulbs, and their stems are leaned slightly downhill, which helps with the curing. And then we just go through the other side of where the bulbs are hanging out, and we can just kind of clip those off into a basket or something, and then clean them and then take those to market or sell them or whatever we're doing with them. It's not as pretty of a system necessarily, but space-wise, it's at least very efficient. Now, curing and storage can be different, but they don't necessarily have to be. What we do is store our garlic in the same place we cure it, that barn, old smokehouse thing. And then when fall hits, like when it starts to get cold, we will move some of it to the cooler to keep it for a bit longer. The garlic will generally do fine for several months at those ambient temperatures, though I want to emphasize that it could just be our varieties, which is mostly music. Your varieties may be a little different. In order to ensure longer storage life after curing, which takes about 2 to 3 weeks, you can move the garlic to more refrigeration temperatures. That will increase the storageability of your garlic, in some cases by several months versus keeping them in warm, humid barn that we keep them in. Because our season is typically done by October, when we store some for the winter and plant the rest, storageability isn't necessarily a concern on our farm, but it may be for you, where you want to keep the garlic as long as possible for markets or eating or whatever. So you will need a refrigeration setup with low relative humidity in the 60 to 70% range. You don't want the garlic to freeze either. So make sure if it's outside, like if the cooler or the fridge or whatever you have is outside, you have a thermostat and heating option to keep the cooler above freezing. And that's basically it. Nothing super complicated when it comes to curing and storing garlic. It just has to be done, roughly at the right temperatures, and especially with airflow. That is key. Like I said, it really comes down to airflow and the right temperatures for curing, and then get them somewhere they can hang out for as long as possible, like a fridge. That typically does the trick so long as they are put in a breathable container and don't get wet. Like, you don't want to straight up seal them in a plastic bag. The condensation and lack of airflow could lead and will likely lead to some sort of rot. Anyway, let me know your questions or thoughts you have, or feel free to describe your system. I think a lot of people overthink the curing and storage side of garlic, but it's equally possible to underthink it as well, I suppose. Okay, anyway, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, flowers for you. You deserve it. BRB.
Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. All right, back to the show.
If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere the questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Amy Blankenship, who writes, quote, "Hi, Jesse. I look forward to unwinding with your show every evening. Thank you. The other day you said something like the more flowers, the better. I have trouble starting my flower seeds to have even cool weather flowers ready for when temperatures start to warm in the spring. Luckily, I do have large quantities of wildflowers / weeds and clover, but would rather be more intentional. I've been wondering if you give over precious greenhouse space and plant care time to flower seedlings in the spring, or if you just buy them in. Do you spend compost on the ones that are not interplanted, or leave them to fend for themselves in terms of nutrition? Something else?" End quote. All right, great questions here. I love this, and it's not something I've talked about a whole lot, so it'll be fun to cover it. But yes, in order to increase our pollinator and native pest predator populations, those sorts of things, growers basically need something flowering at all times to keep those insects fed or flowering as much as possible. Obviously, in the winters, it's more or less out of the picture for most of us, but flowering as much as possible. And for that reason, I often recommend growing flowers all season. Simultaneously, as Amy suggests, some flowers can be a bit complicated, requiring things like long spells in the greenhouse and maybe stratification, etc. But here's the thing. In order to achieve what I'm talking about with flowers, one does not need to grow complicated flowers. In fact, some sweet alyssum, some dill, some cilantro, and some flowering clovers around the garden can get you incredibly far in terms of both pollinators and pest predation for the season. Those are relatively easy to grow out and will flower early and then flower late into the season, requiring almost nothing in the way of fertility. In fact, I have been starting a few cells of cilantro with every tray of head lettuce I grow, so that when I plant it, I can plant the cilantro at the same time, get a cutting or so off of it, and then let it flower. It's not a perfect combo because the cilantro is a little slow, but the idea is simplifying both the planting of that crop, the lettuce and the cilantro. I just do it at the same time. And the introduction of that flower, which notably also brings in a little bit of shade to the lettuce, so that's a bonus. I also have cilantro in my late seeded cover crop so that it will flower early in the spring. This will be a theme for the spring flowers, as you will see soon. So that's a win on a couple different levels. Sunflowers are also in there, and we start a new tray of those every few weeks in the spring, and then maybe an extra couple trays in the summer. They need slightly more fertility, but not really. Only if you want to sell them as cut flowers, which you were usually growing the pro cut sorts of varieties for that. We usually just grow the sunflowers that are grown for seed, I guess. Now, Hannah also starts a couple trays of flowers like borage, nasturtium, tithonia, zinnias, cosmos, etc. Those usually just get in where they can fit in, gaps in the hedges or beds that I know are not going to be great for certain veggies, and those will sacrifice to flowers. We also have yarrow and chamomile around the farm in multiple places. I sowed some wildflowers around our property in various spots as well, like our orchards. And we have some trees and flowering shrubs and those sorts of things. Those perennials are more longer term projects, so any amount of greenhouse space they take up is generally for a short time, if at all, or we just buy in the plant starts if need be. Also, of course, more to the question about springtime, instead of starting stuff over winter, I'm relying more on loads of flowering crops like crimson clover, lacy phacelia, the grains. Again, bugs love those little rye flowers. and vetch as well in there. Crimson clover, rye, and vetch I often plant in the fall. Lacey Facelia and cilantro, for their part, usually do better when I plant them in the winter here, usually like January or maybe late December. I will also add some crimson clover in there as well. Oh, and of course, buckwheat. In the summer for a quick flower, that is an easy one that requires no tunnel space and very little garden space. So I guess to put it simply, plant a few native perennials whose flowering season is spread out a bit. Start some fast-growing annuals like alyssum, cilantro, dill, borage, tithonia, etc., and embrace some flowering cover crops, and you should be good to go without a ton of extra work and almost no fertility investment. I would not really use compost on any of those crops, save for perhaps the cilantro and dill for the initial cutting, and maybe for sunflowers if I wanted to sell the flower itself. Or like you said, if I was interplanting them and I didn't want competition with my main crops, then I might, and I don't know why I would want competition with my main crops, but if I didn't want it, then I would want to put a little extra fertility in there in the form of some compost. Like so many things in farming, it's really just all about keeping it simple. Anyway, great question. For the moment, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, what bringing more manufacturing to the U.S. means for farmland. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. If you're listening to this, you probably found 5 rare minutes to breathe, but what got pushed back further down the to-do list to make that happen? If it's your CSA newsletter, you're not alone. Farmhand's new newsletter builder was made for busy farmers. It automates weekly emails, drives add-on sales, and makes it easy to keep your customers in the loop without spending hours behind a screen. It launches this summer, but our listeners can request early access now. Visit farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. All right, so there's been a bit of a theme this month on the podcast of the relationship between land and health, mental health, but also with emphasis physical health. And this story popped up recently that is hyper local to me at the moment, but will likely be local to many of us soon, if it isn't already. For a while now, just up the road from where I live, there are signs that read "No to Industrial Park." Those were in lawns all over the place. Like I said, it's going to get hyper local for a second, but I imagine this is very likely to be relevant to you soon because there has been a proposal to turn around 300 acres of farmland into an industrial park in our area that, although it is not clear what is actually going into that park, is billed as bringing jobs and taxes and all the things. According to the press release, the target industries are advanced manufacturing, ag tech, biopharma, and life sciences. So basically, it could be about anything. There are, to be sure, a lot of abandoned buildings already in the area, and notably not a ton of extra farmland. But anyway, residents of that specific spot are clearly unsettled. If the idea of these industries not only bringing traffic and less scenic views to our beautiful area is not enough, the reality of the potential pollution from construction, general operations, and general waste to the air and water is also alarming. And it should be. These are things that will have measurable health effects down the line, as we've discussed already. But perhaps unwittingly, this development of land is also what the world is actually asking for when it is asking to increase manufacturing in the United States. We indeed get more manufacturing, just in our backyards and almost always on our farmland. The reality is that I don't think when anyone steps back and thinks about what an increase in American manufacturing means, that they really think a lot about that reality. The backyards or farmland being developed while all the wasted space we have that is already developed goes unused. America should, in my opinion, not strive to be China in that way, a place that has significant environmental issues, as we know. We don't need more manufacturing in the US. We need more well-managed farmland. We need more ecological areas. We need more clean water, clean air, more green spaces for our health, for the health of our food, for the health of the people that grow our food, all those things. But perhaps more than anything, we need less consumerism overall. America is the #1 consumer market in the world and supports innumerable factories all over because we just consume so much stuff. So the problem isn't necessarily like a lack of factories here, but a confusion of priorities, in my opinion. We have ushered in and then accepted the sort of planned obsolescence that defines basically everything we buy at a box store. It will last a short while, and then we need to replace it with another one. We all know that, and we're somehow cool with it. But if we care about our health, we care about our lands. They are not mutually exclusive ideas. I Just want to make sure that's drilled in there. Then we have to be a place that does not support this sort of waste and effectively supports fewer factories in general, preferring to wear the same shirt, for instance, a few more times, or buy perhaps slightly longer lasting toasters because we value the land on which those items were constructed. Consumerism is about consumption. It starts with the consumption of the goods, but it ends with the consumption of the land and ultimately the consumption of ourselves, especially if we were not putting any of it back into the soil. Or alternatively, we can all just get pumped for the industrial park coming to the farmland near you. Awesome. So anyway, all that to say, I hope you all have a nice Wednesday. Also, let us know if this is something you are seeing or do see in the future for your area. Farmland is already hard enough to come by. Land untainted by industry is less and less the norm. Certainly, 300 acres in Kentucky is a drop in the bucket, but as anyone who has had a slow leak can attest, enough drops and the bucket fills up while you're not paying attention. Anyway, I think I will wrap it up there. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a 501c3 nonprofit, so donations, while they're tax deductible, greatly appreciated. You can learn more about how to do that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you are getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook that I wrote, or The Seed Farmer that Dan Brisebois wrote, over at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of June, you get a shout out in the show and maybe an inclusion in the story. We'll find out. So big shout outs today to Tobias Deerdorf. That is just the most novelistic name we've had in a while there, Tobias. Tobias Deerdorf. Great. Love it. All right. So when John gets home, he places the small flat box that the gruff owner of the diner had given him and instructed him to put under his pillow. So he does that, and then he goes to sleep, dutifully. And when he wakes up in the morning, he is decidedly no longer at home, but rather in a small cave with somebody named, let's say, Tobias, standing over John. And Tobias says, "All right, you must be the new guy. Let's go." So they walk out of the cave and into the wildest looking place that John had ever seen. It was nothing like his native Nova Scotia, but rather hot and muggy, loud with bugs and birds, and just green and lush. They walk down the path and into a clearing where John sees a massive garden and orchard with people all over the place, working in and out of the fields, and fires going, and lots of small structures where presumably people lived. The smell of food and smoke was absolutely overwhelming. And Tobias says, "We're getting your first delivery ready now." Delivery for what? To where? John asks. That is for tomorrow on This Ain't Your Average Maritime. That'll be the title for the day. Only has to last like 24 hours. Anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you then.